For today's video, I chose to go for a luminous color combo and also challenge myself to paint a beautiful lake in snow with a lot of the trees nearby reflecting in the water. And even though it can look intimidating to paint this kind of thing, it wasn't as difficult as I thought, so I'm going to show you how I did that and also walk you through the whole painting step by step. There's only going to be two colors, so it's not going to be a lot of back and forth between colors, and instead we can focus on each element: sky, trees, snow, and water. Painting this watercolor lake motivated me to explore painting water more in depth, so I'm really hoping you will feel the same way by the end of this video, especially if you feel a bit fearful to get into painting water, reflection, and light in this way. Hi, this is Françoise. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a returning subscriber. Step 1 for this watercolor painting for beginners is to gather a 5x7 piece of watercolor paper, some masking tape, your paints, and some paintbrushes. You can customize this as you want, but if you prefer to see what I'm using here, there are links to all my supplies in the description. In any case, I always recommend 100% cotton paper cold pressed, and for this particular painting, I think a couple of round brushes that can get to a fine tip will do perfectly. The fine tip is important because, as you may have noticed at the beginning of the video, my trees are really tiny and there's also a fence that requires small and precise strokes. So if you don't have exactly the right type of brush, don't let it stop you from painting this tutorial, but you may find it harder to paint those trees and fence the way I did. For colors, I chose to go for Payne's Gray and Indian Red. You can substitute those for indigo or blue mixed with black. And for Indian Red, you can pick a color like a brown with a bit of red, or even orange, although orange alone may look a little bit more flashy compared to the shade I'm using here. There is no sketch except for the horizon line I traced at about a third of the page starting from the bottom part, so with that said, we can get straight into the painting. Step 2 is going to be the sky, and for that I picked up my large round brush that I always use for backgrounds, and I decided to work wet on dry. Usually skies are made wet in wet to avoid harsh lines and get a good sky look, but it's difficult to get intense colors when it dries, unless you go back and add layers, which is what I usually do. So here I wanted to make it super easy and go right in on dry paper with my Indian Red shade. The only thing you need to be careful of is to spread the paint fast, because a wet on dry layer of paint dries way faster than paint applied wet and wet. This technique right here creates beautiful effects, I noticed, because when I spread my paint, I sometimes add a bit too much water on my brush, and it creates these wider patches or even blooms, which in the case of sky I find pretty cool. Blooms are something I rarely do on purpose, but here I created a very obvious one. I did this to suggest a sun rising. It needed to be visible, and adding water to my brush, then pressing my brush onto my paper in that spot, gave me that perfect bright sun rays look I was hoping for. Before the paint dries, I'm adding a bit of Payne's Gray with my small brush. You can do it whichever way you like and use whichever brush you like, but here I wanted a specific look for my clouds to suggest an early and peaceful morning. So I made them really thin, and I kept it to just a few of them because I don't want my sky to look like a storm's coming. While the sky was drying, I gave a slight tone to the snow with a very light wash of Payne's Gray, and then I added a little bit of Payne's Gray here and there, and even a bit of Indian Red to make the painting more balanced with colors. Otherwise it would just be a bunch of Indian Red on top and gray at the bottom. Plus we can imagine the sky reflecting in the snow a little bit too. You will notice later I also added a bit of Indian Red to my trees for the same reason, to create a harmony of colors within the entire painting. If your sky is not completely dry when you paint the snow, leave a tiny paper white line between sky and snow. By now, the sky should be dry. If not, I suggest to wait, since we're going to take care of the lake and we don't want it to bleed into the sky and into the nice bloom we have created. Here I started with a base layer of Indian Red. We want to keep it light because there's going to be more over it later. And we also need to use the lifting technique to recreate the light of the sun. For that, you will need to dip a clean brush into your water jar, squeeze enough water out of it that it becomes almost entirely dry, but not quite, and then lift the color you just applied on your paper before it dries. Otherwise, it's already too late, and the lifting technique won't work well, and leave a harsh line or even a bloom. Next, I used a heat gun to dry out the paint on the lake because I wanted to get started on the trees in the background, and doing this on dry paper is again important, unless you don't want your trees to be as crisp as mine, but then your sky would need to be a little damp too, so in this case it's better to have it all dry. I used a paintbrush that comes to a very fine tip here. You don't need yours to be as precise as this one to manage the trees, but if you have anything that comes close, that's just great. I started with the top of the tree going downwards, and I added a little bit of Indian red before each tree dried. You may be noticing my trees are irregular in shape, length, and some of them are a bit crooked too, to create this sense of realism, even though this piece is not really meant to look extremely realistic. After I was done with the trees, I painted their reflection in the water, wet on dry. And this was the first time I ever did it this way, and I'm really happy with the way it looks, so I think I'm just going to dig that a little more. I also painted the reflection of some trees we'll come to later, and I made that darker since they're closer. I forgot to mention that where the sun is rising, you should be careful to make the trees and the reflection there much lighter. I kept on going, adding details to the water to make it look more real, and again I made it a lot darker towards the front. I tried to alternate and paint some thin lines and also larger areas to suggest movement of the water. I think what matters the most here is to make sure you're not painting too many of these, and it's always hard to know where to stop. And also paint these shapes so they're not all the same. Act on the intensity of the colors as well, and layer darker lines, for instance, on top of lighter areas. And finally, remember the sun is reflecting in the middle of the lake, and so these lines will be much less visible there. So there, it's best to keep it minimal and very light. Next up, I painted the trees in the foreground, and I used the same brush and the same technique I did previously with the far back trees. The only major difference here is the size of those trees. They're going to be bigger since they're closer to us, and what's different is also the color value, the intensity. I used a darker wash of Payne's Gray to make sure these trees pop and look close. And again, I made their shape irregular and scattered them unevenly. I chose to darken the shadow and reflection in the water below, but unless you find that yours needs it too, that's optional, and this was mainly me pushing the experimentation further because, like I said, I'm getting into painting water some more, so I think I still have a lot to experiment with. Now this is my favorite part, finishing the painting with the details. I don't think I mentioned it, but there's actually no reference for this. I put these elements together, and I tried several compositions and ideas before I came up with this. I really wanted to paint a fence for this one. I like how it's receding when it reaches the trees, and I really wanted to create that kind of look. I also like how drawing the shadows makes it look so much more interesting, and yet it's so easy to do, but it makes such a great difference. For the fence, you need to use your darkest wash of Payne's Gray, or whichever color you're working with. The sticks should not look all the same principle as the trees, and they should look smaller and closer together as they recede towards the back. For the shadow, I used a lighter wash of Payne's Gray, and I was careful to think of where the sun is shining from. So if I'm correct, and I hope I am, the shadows should be aiming this way and look long like this, since the sun is so low in the sky. I drew the shadows for the trees as well, and because I love them, I couldn't help but add a few splatters on the snow to give it more character, and I really like the look. There was something missing on the top left of the painting, so I added some branches there, and to tell you the truth, I found they ruined the whole thing as I was painting them, which really bugged me when I was filming this, because towards the end of a painting that has been going well, especially with YouTube videos, you're just hoping the final touches make it more beautiful, and not the opposite, so I wasn't too happy with them, but when I added the white gouache on top, it made these branches look a lot better. That's one thing with white gouache in winter paintings. I feel like it really helps make a painting and even helps fix mistakes. So I love gouache. Tell me in the comments if you feel the same way, but just know that if you're not using gouache, you're really missing out because it's a great medium to use with watercolor. I added a few spots of it on the fence and on the trees, and voila! Or in my own French accent, voila! I hope you enjoyed this new watercolor painting for beginners and that this beautiful snowy scenery got you in the mood for some more winter paintings before spring kicks in. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below, and if you're not subscribed, please do turn on notifications or like this video if you liked it. This always helps my channel, so I'm really grateful for you guys and for your contributions. And until the next video, happy painting!